So yeah, by way of introduction, my name is Chris, and I work at STAR for a week at least still. My role at STAR is Equal Access Coordinator, but STAR itself is a national charity of students. We welcome refugees to the UK and we volunteer at local refugee projects. We campaign to improve the lives of refugees and educate people about refugees and asylum. So the volunteering might be refugee football clubs, it might be English language like programs, it might be access courses or open days, which I know run at universities. Campaigning might include parliamentary campaigning or kind of involving in Refugee Week, things like that, creating events on campus to improve the rights of refugees. And also education on campus as well might include films, it might include just awareness raising about the issues that people face trying to access protection in the UK. And there's, I think, 50 different STAR groups now in 33 towns and cities across the UK. And roughly speaking, it's a movement of around 30,000 students. So it's quite a big movement. I think it's the biggest kind of refugee specialist campaigning group in the UK, at least at student level. And yeah, we do a lot of work across the country. We've got a national office of about 6 people, of whom I'm one. And my kind of brief at STAR is running the Equal Access campaign. So this has been going since 2008. We work in partnership with the National Union of Students, and we campaign for access to higher education for refugees and asylum seekers in the UK. And we do this in 4 key ways. So we work with universities and partners like we're doing today to try and improve scholarships or increase them, encourage universities to share good practice and develop their programs further. We work with students and refugee activists to actually campaign for scholarship programs and create them kind of through grassroots campaigning methods. We advertise places and we try and increase access for potential applicants. So we reach out to groups and we go teach on certain courses. We'll try and create access courses at open days, other pathways as well, where we can actually promote the work of STAR and promote the scholarships that everyone here today is kind of working on to potential applicants and help fill places to make sure the scholarships are upheld and kept going by filling places up. We also advocate for policy change. And we've worked on a number of legal challenges this year, and we also kind of present the work of the UK, which is quite unique actually, in terms of having about 75 different universities offering scholarship programs voluntarily on the international stage as well. So we went to the Global Refugee Forum with one of our refugee activists and kind of promoted what STAR did there as well. There's some STAR students in the meeting. Oh, that's fantastic news. Hi everyone. Sorry, if you feel free to introduce yourselves on the chat. So that's a brief overview of what STAR does and what my role at STAR is. So I will just go on to, essentially the Equal Access campaign has 3 key asks. We want the university to classify all those people seeking asylum as home students for fee purposes. And this was already really highlighted by the fantastic presentation from St Andrews, who already do that, which is wonderful. I know a question came up in the chat about this point, which was whether this actually affected people's access to student finance. And Ian, thank you for picking that one up in the chat. It doesn't affect access to student finance. People are still unable to access student finance. But what it does do is it potentially enables a very small number of people who could afford home student fees, but not international fees, to be able to go to university. And it also makes a statement, which is what we at STAR believe, that people seeking asylum are not the same as international students. They shouldn't have the same barriers to education. They've come here to seek protection. And they should, under Article 26 of the Declaration of Human Rights, have access to education on merit. And so from our perspective, classifying home students for fee purposes is a statement from universities, as well as also enabling some people to study. I think that's really important. What we're going to talk about today, we ask universities to offer scholarships that cover study and maintenance costs for people who have come into the UK and are seeking protection. And we also encourage universities to help create access pathways to support those as well. So these might be outreach programs. They might be kind of using networks, which might be kind of joint in schools and things to try and promote as many people to actually kind of think about going to university, to kind of make that path right the way from first thinking about accessing university, going right the way through to graduating, and make sure there's a path for people to kind of go through. And we also ask university to publicise equal access policies so that students can easily apply. And a great way to do that is a University of Sanctuary programme. We also promote scholarships on our list on our website as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about the kind of potential barriers that people are facing here. And I think it's always good to kind of ground ground people's, sorry, I'm going to have to go back a couple of slides, just ground the discussion in kind of what people are actually facing. I'm sure some of you will know these challenges already and have come across them in your work. So excuse me if I go over things you do already know, but hopefully it's helpful, and feel free to add more in the chat and kind of discuss as well. So there are some key barriers in the UK which prevent people who are seeking refugee protection to access higher education. These can be loosely categorised in these terms, although of course some are contextual, some are structural. But certainly the key financial barriers, which we'll talk about today, access to student finance. There's also English language course tests. A lot of this is IELTS, but there are other language tests as well. UCAS fees, funding to support application preparations, extra support on course for maybe texts, academic needs. And there's also the limitations of asylum support as well, which obviously, excuse me, is a major problem, especially when you're trying to live on £37 a week in the UK, and especially at the moment. People might have seen recently there's a current campaign to improve support during the COVID crisis by raising it by £20 a week. There's a petition going around, so if anyone is interested in signing that, I definitely would recommend it personally, and I think as an organisation we recommend it too. So I'll try and put that in the chat later. There's also structural barriers, and that includes negotiating the asylum system, which is notoriously complex and very stressful. There's potential restrictions of asylum non-access to study. These are things that have been actually the subject of recent legal challenges, but the Home Office is able to restrict people from studying if they are kind of between applications. So they might have finished one application and be putting in a fresh claim. During that period, the Home Office is able to implement a study ban, which is quite unfair, but can cause problems for students. There's also qualification recognition, and so people might not have their relevant qualifications because they might have left them behind, or the university might not actually recognise that particular qualification or where it's from. There's English language requirements, which, especially during this period of COVID-19 kind of response, are quite difficult to go around because IELTS testing centres are closed. And in any case, they can be a bit of a bottleneck. There's also contextual barriers in terms of confidence about applying, information about the opportunities there, and understanding the UK application system as well. So there's a big mix there, but I hope it's a good overview of what people are kind of doing. In terms of the financial barriers, this is a rough guide to the kind of fee status for different groups across the UK. I'm not going to go into each one in detail. You'll notice that Scotland is a lot better than other regions in terms of actually providing access, which is no surprise. But still there is work to do, and I think the thing I would definitely point you towards in terms of getting this right all the time, and who I rely on to make sure I have the information I need for this, is UKISA, which is the UK Council of International Student Affairs, and many of you universities might actually be member organisations of that. If you are members, there's a helpline you can call, and that's something which you can actually call up and check advice. If you're not members, their advice on their website is free to access, so do take a look. We'll be sharing the slideshow afterwards, so all the links in here should be useful for you to go and have a look at. There has been recent changes, which this is a slideshow from last week where we were talking in England as well. So there have been some recent changes to humanitarian protection, but these don't apply in Scotland at the moment, so I won't go into that now. But it's certainly in Scotland too. It's an area where the legal landscape is shifting constantly, and certainly in England it's very poorly written and often under challenge and revision. There's obviously other financial barriers we've gone over too, and the asylum support issue, which I think is something that's good to consider, is the kind of Section 95 support. One area that should be considered when creating scholarships is to what extent the provision of maintenance funding might impact on the Section 95 support. So smaller grants of funding can be a problem because it might not be enough for someone to live off, but it might be enough to actually pull someone off their asylum support of £37 a week. So that's something to consider, and we can maybe talk about that in the breakout groups about how people get around it. But I know some good practice of how people kind of offer things in kind. So we'll come to that point, but it's something to just kind of remember. In terms of non-financial barriers, and I think it's something to really stress, is that everyone's experience of the asylum system is different. There's no one refugee experience, and I wouldn't want to speak for a single or any kind of person in this. But it is the case that some people might experience these kind of difficulties of culture shock, language difficulties, isolation, stress and things like that during the process. And I think it's really important to consider that throughout someone's time on a scholarship, whether they're first applying, on course, finishing up, all of these problems might come up, and it might kind of be a contextual kind of background to someone's experience. So it's just good to consider these things as well. It goes without saying, the asylum system itself is very complicated and it's very stressful. It's really important to make sure that people are aware, particularly tutors and things are aware that if students are on asylum on scholarship programs, but still going through the asylum system, that there is this kind of contextual background. So making people aware where possible and where appropriate is really important, and also offering some sort of service, whether that's counselling or just some sort of pastoral support for any students, particularly younger students who are going through this process on their own as well. So, as I said earlier, there is a solution at the moment in the UK, and it's the only, I think, country where there's this level of support on a voluntary basis. The only programme I know of that's larger in terms of places is the German programme, which is the Daffy Scholarship Programme, and that's centrally funded by the German Foreign Office. In the UK, there is no central fund, as you're well aware, but 75 universities and counting now, I think probably nearer 78, are offering scholarship programmes. It's a number of places, somewhere between 250 and 300 places a year. And that's, as far as I know, the largest kind of voluntary programme. So each scholarship offers something slightly different. They're all contextual to the needs of the university, to who they want to target for their recruitment, and to which kind of groups, whether it's undergraduate or postgraduate. And we try and collect this information on the STAR website in a list here, which we kind of send out to. We have a mailing list of potential applicants. We send it out on Twitter. We try and link through other universities, so it's linked to and through other organisations, so it's linked from the UNHCR page and various things. So we try and keep that information central and collated so people can easily compare and find out about programmes. So if your programme isn't on there, please get in touch. If you notice there's something wrong with your programme, I try and keep it as up to date as possible, but also please do send in corrections because we try our very best, but obviously we can miss things. So that's kind of what we do there. I'm just going to quickly check the chat. Thanks to those of you who are answering questions in the chat. We can come to those later, but I just want to keep checking it. So where are we? So I'm going to go across to Ian now at the University of Strathclyde, who's going to give us some good practice about the work they do there. Ian, shall I move your slides on for you?
Yes, please, if you could, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Okay, so afternoon, everyone. My name's Ian. I head up our student support and development team at the University of Strathclyde. I'm just going to talk you through our Asylum scholarship, which we have been running since academic year 2014-15. Next slide, please, Chris. So a bit of context. Glasgow, some of you, apologies to those of you who already know this, but since the Immigration and Asylum Act in 1999, the Home Office has had a policy of dispersing asylum seekers around the UK. The only dispersal location in Scotland until recently was Glasgow. It means that there's a large population of asylum seekers and post-decision people who've been given status who remain in Glasgow. So we've got a significant population of asylum seekers on step as a university. So it means our approach to asylum scholarships is possibly a bit different to colleagues. I'm really conscious of what we heard earlier about St Andrews, where you're in a location where there isn't a kind of static population of asylum seekers who might be accessing courses. You're bringing people in to the location to teach them. So in this context, there are somewhere between 1,700 and 1,800 children seeking asylum in Scotland at the moment. That's based on the numbers receiving asylum support. So there was a question going around, what is asylum support? It's quite important to understand that in the context of the way we run our scholarship. So I'm going to come back to it. Just to finish off on the context, next slide, Chris. So our Students' Union campaigned for additional support for asylum-seeking students at the university, led by a student who was a former asylum seeker, Rosa Sally, one of the Glasgow girls, if you've ever heard of that story. I think it's fair to Union was knocking at an open door we are really seeking to address two financial barriers. Chris has already covered off the legislative position of asylum seekers in terms of accessing statutory student funding. So we're lucky in Scotland in that anyone who has status and their family members are usually able to access SAS support without too much trouble. But what we were finding is a significant, because we have a large number of young people in Glasgow who are seeking asylum or whose parents are seeking asylum, a lot of these kids go through school with their peers, and the schools quite rightly try do a good job of integrating those students into mainstream education. And then they hit a brick wall when they leave secondary education, because all their friends are going off to university and they're applying to SAS for funding. And suddenly, quite often without realizing this was going to happen to them, they realize that unless they get some kind of scholarship, they're going to be treated as an international student and they're effectively priced out of higher education. The other group that we find we get a lot of applications from are older asylum seekers who are seeking to requalify and to restart a career in the UK with a view to being ready to seek work after they get status from the Home Office. We're currently supporting 14 scholars. Since 2014, we've helped 34 people onto courses. And this is the point at which I'll talk you through how students apply for a course and then what we actually do for each student. So next slide, Chris. So we decided to keep our process very straightforward. So basically, any student who is holding an offer from the university can be considered for a scholarship. So students do need to apply separately for their course. We still need to do more work on getting word out to students who want to study at undergraduate level, making sure that they are applying to UCAS before the 15th of January deadline. That's still a kind of work in progress. But through reaching out to local schools and organisations like the Scottish Refugee Council, word is getting out there. So any student who receives an offer can be considered for a scholarship. We usually organise a selection panel kind of late May, early June. It's going to be interesting seeing how we're going to do that this year. What we do is we ask the panel, so the panel is comprised of academics and support staff and student union representatives. And what we do is we score each application on 3 criteria. One is the extent to which migration status has affected their access to or their completion of education. So, for example, someone who has had to give up a degree in their home country 1 year in and flee and has then had a couple of years of disruption and wants to get back into education might score quite highly on that criteria. We assess the likelihood that someone will actually take up the course and be able to complete the course. So that's effectively their academic potential. And we also do take into consideration the broader kind of context. Are they going to be able to do this course? We also ask students to articulate how doing this course that we're going to fund will either help them progress their career or help them make a contribution to the community. And the reason we ask that is, quite understandably, some students really apply for courses because they struggle to know what else to do with their time. And while that's understandable, we feel we should be prioritizing people who are looking at their course with us as the next step to an end goal, whether that's being a community activist or furthering their own professional career. We do ask them to articulate that. So that's how we assess scholarship. We work in partnership with the Carnegie Trust. So on our undergraduate scholarships, the Carnegie Trust are also involved in the decision-making process. And our partnership with the Carnegie Trust has really been transformative in terms of the number of scholarships we offer. Next slide, please, Chris. So what we do for the scholars is, first of all, every scholar is charged home fees rather than international fees. We then make sure those fees are paid. So if it's a postgraduate student, we will pay the fees from internal funding. the Carnegie Trust have undertaken to pay the home fees for all our undergraduate scholars, which is great, which means that we have been able to expand the scholarship considerably. Then what we do is we offer the students, now this is where I probably need to explain a little bit about asylum support. So most asylum seekers receive support from the Home Office, either under Section 95 or Section 96 of the relevant Act. What that means is they will get a small cash allowance. So I'm looking for somebody to correct me if I'm wrong, £37 a week, I think, at the moment, for living costs. And they will, if they don't have anywhere to stay, they will be provided with accommodation. Chris has already mentioned this. If we were to give those students small amounts of money, every pound that we gave those students would be taken off their asylum support. And if we give them enough money to be more than £37 a week, or enough money to be more than £37 a week and the cost of accommodation, they will then be evicted from their Home Office accommodation. So in consultation with the Scottish Refugee Council, we decided that a better way to support these students, because most of these students live on our doorstep anyway, a better way to support students was to provide them with study-related costs. So things like buying them a laptop, paying for a travel card, paying for their books, buying equipment for them, paying for childcare so that they can attend courses. I've put a little asterisk next to childcare because we won't blanket pay all childcare costs, but we will pay costs that are affordable to us and seem reasonable in line with the study needs of the student. That way, by providing those costs, we kind of get around the whole Home Office support issue. We have had a couple of students who have been challenged on the fact that they're doing a course, and the Home Office have said, why are you, how can you afford this? Why are you studying? You must have undeclared income. We don't think you're destitute. And we've effectively intervened and provided them with documentation to say, no, they don't have any additional income. We are meeting their study related costs. But if you're going to use a model like this, you do need to be ready that you may need to be quite robust in your response to the Home Office when they challenge students on these issues. The other thing that we offer each scholar is a member of staff who's a mentor, and that member of staff will be someone who's not involved in teaching or assessing that student. And the mentor is their go-to person for general questions about the university. Next slide, please. So we operate the scholarship in partnership really with internal partners through our mentors. We have had Uptake, our widening access team, send a call out every year to staff to volunteer to mentor either students who are leaving care or our asylum seeking scholars, and we always get a really good uptake of volunteers to act as mentors. Our experience with undergraduate scholars has been that mentors are actually really instrumental in the student's success, because a lot of the issues that they are facing don't fall neatly into a category that you can direct to a specific service. It's really, really helpful for them to have someone who is completely outside of their academic process, doesn't have anything to do with any other aspect of their university life, who's really just there as a kind of critical friend, older sibling kind of figure to provide sort of informal advice and direction. And I would say certainly for some of our scholars, the mentors have been the person that has kept a student on their course and helped them succeed. We work very closely with the Scottish Refugee Council, and they've been excellent in providing us with advice. Most recently, we decided to send our scholars some additional support during lockdown. And again, so that it wouldn't impact their asylum support, we sent them vouchers that they can use to buy additional study-related equipment or pay for additional data on SIM cards. Our partnership with the Carnegie Trust has been excellent. They've been really, really supportive. And if anyone's thinking of using this model, do speak to the Carnegie Trust. I know their income is being hit by the lockdown at the moment, but prior to lockdown, they were very, very positive about wanting to do this with more institutions. So it's well worth looking into with them. And finally, we also are with a local organisation in Glasgow. So Bridges Programmes works primarily to help new migrants into employment, but they also have an education strand. And we run seminars every autumn for students who are interested in applying to university, regardless of which university. So we talk them through the kind of realities of UK higher education, funding entitlements, and how to apply to UCAS, and then Bridges give them additional individual support to complete that process. Next step, next slide, sorry, Chris. So in terms of how the scholarship has worked for us and what's happened, we've had really, really positive responses from within the university to the work that we do, to the point that the principal has mentioned our work with New Scots, as he quite correctly called them, in graduation speeches. He was very pleased that we were also nominated and won a Herald Gen Analytics Diversity Through Education Award last year, which was great. Those kind of things really help cement the argument with senior management about the value of what you're doing, because there's public recognition there. Next steps, we are really conscious that we probably need to do more on matching students up to courses that are appropriate, and really helping students make informed decisions about career choices. The other area that we'd like to develop is more support for students after they get status. So possibly offering them mentoring. We're really conscious that statutory funding for master's level study in particular isn't really sufficient for someone who doesn't have any family support or other alternative sources of income in the UK. So that's an ongoing discussion for us about how we can support students going into master's level programs. And just finally, I wanted to share some of the individual impacts we've had. So Chris, can you? So you can see this when we circulate the slides, but I would say that these three scholars are pretty much there are lots of other similar stories from our scholars. So one of our scholars who's still with us, who recently got status, 5 A's in his hires at school. He was head boy, but his mum was still waiting for an asylum decision. He's now passed the first 3 years of his studies with distinction. Real high flyer, and an excellent ambassador for the scholarship program. What I would say is, if you have scholars who are willing to be a bit more public about themselves, and that is something that you need to be careful with in terms of protecting people's privacy, then academics respond really, really well to students like that. It really kind of cements the idea that that this really is a worthwhile thing to do. Another example, a young woman who arrived in the UK unaccompanied as a minor. She's now gained status, and when we spoke to her about the scholarship, she basically said to us, it was the first encounter I had with a UK official body that wanted to help me rather than put up barriers, which I think is the experience a lot of people have with the Home Office. And finally, one of our postgrad students is now a walking advocate for our institution, and I think a good argument, if you're presenting an argument to colleagues about setting up a scholarship, is a lot of our scholars do become very, very loyal advocates for the university. And that's a really excellent additional bonus that helps you sell the scholarship program. quite happy to take questions now or when we break out into the groups, because I think, Chris, you're going to do one group and I'm going to do the other. Is that right?
I think so. So there's going to be a breakout and it's going to be randomly allocated, but hopefully it will work out that way. And if not, I'll move to another group. It seems easier than I've only just got the hang of breakout groups. Thank you so much, Ian. That's been like really, really helpful. If we can do the questions after, that's great. And I think that's just some really great things to kind of highlight there in terms of the kind of mentoring process. Seems like a fantastic thing. The level of support it sounds like you've got from the VC is brilliant, and also it's nice to see the comparison of kind of a program that works very much in a local area where there's lots of dispersal and is suited to the needs of that, and St Andrews, which are obviously in a different process, kind of brings people in and provides support to allow people to live off their asylum support as well. And I think it just shows there's a context to every scholarship. Every scholarship is different because it works for a university, and there's no right way, there's no one way of doing this, and it's really great to see that. So thank you so much for sharing, and I'm sure people will have questions as well. I'm just going to go over a few last pieces and then we're going to go into breakout rooms, and something I wanted to kind of share is so we have a group of scholars and former scholars at STAR who kind of act as a steering group for our campaign, and I kind of asked them before this and the previous presentation we've done. Other person from before we did this about kind of what their asks were for universities, and this is kind of what they said, that they wanted to make things were clear. Making sure people had kind of a point of contact was really important. It sounds like the mentor at Strathclyde is a perfect way of doing that. I think meeting other scholars, if people are happy to meet, can be really great to know there are other people experiencing the same things at universities. And there's also the kind of, I think something that is often said to me, I know it's very difficult for universities to do, is providing some form of feedback about applications if people are unsuccessful, because I know people do end up applying several times for programs, and I think obviously where it's possible, it's good practice to do that because it can help people longer term to kind of get successful applications in. So I'm just going to talk about kind of 4 areas which might be kind of prompts for our breakout groups. This will be very brief, and then we'll go into the groups. So firstly, kind of eligibility. As we said before, it differs across scholarship programs, and universities will have their own requirements and preferences for this. Most target those who can't access finance, and certainly I think that's what a lot of universities' consensus is, those who are in the most need. But there are also some which target kind of groups which aren't necessarily asylum seekers or refugees. And I know Sheila from Cara put in the chat earlier, obviously there are also people who come in who are at-risk students on normal or on regular or non-asylum visas, and those are also important considerations. I know lots of universities offer specialised scholarships for those, whether that's I think Goldsmiths offers like a humanitarian access scholarship for people who've come in from outside of the UK. And also I think it's important to remember there's also groups who are young migrants in the UK who don't have access to higher education as well. And they might be struggling to regularise their status despite living in the UK for a long time. If anyone has come across that kind of issue, I'd point you towards We Belong. We're a group of young migrants who've set up a charity in the UK to support people who've yet to regularise their status but still can't get access to university. So that's something to just kind of, as a background, there's also other groups who are also equally valid and should be considered. But in terms of the kind of group the Equal Access Campaign focuses on, is people who are seeking refugee protection or have refugee protection in the UK. And we suggest universities keep a really broad criteria, but have a hierarchy of needs within that. And that allows universities to make sure places stay filled, but the people who need them most get them when the space is there. So obviously those who can access finance might not be the most immediately, and I think Ian kind of pointed this out. I think looking at disruption to study, looking at access to finance are really kind of key. Sometimes some universities consider, if people do have access to finance, that they only offer a scholarship of a sort of top up, so that they can save some funding to help in future if they have a particularly high number of people who can't access finance in another year. So those are all things to consider in that, and I'm sure that's when people can share their experience of that in the breakout groups. In terms of recruitment, I think there's obviously lots of challenges to recruitment, and I think we've heard some of those from both Ian and also from Sam at St Andrews as well. In terms of qualification recognition, that's a big problem for a lot of people, and finding ways to kind of test by kind of testing aptitude rather than always looking at examinations can be a good way of doing it. Being a bit more flexible on what kind of you can accept. I'm just going to check the chat quickly, guys. That you can accept lots of different kind of different evidences, and also be a bit more flexible around what that evidence might be is a good way of doing it. the actual process that we go through, having a two-step process of needing to be accepted on UCAS and then having to apply for a scholarship, is a challenge for recruitment. It means people are less flexible in what they can do. Obviously, no one can apply through clearing because scholarships have already been allocated by the time of clearing. So that's just something to consider. And being aware of the kind of right to study as well is really important. I also put down deadline issues, because I think that is something that can be a problem if universities are kind of out of step with their scholarship deadlines with the rest of universities, and they generally fall between kind of, I would say, April to June. If they're kind of really out of that bracket, and some universities, if they're working in local areas, that works fine. But if they are out of that bracket, it can mean that scholars might have already made their chosen a scholarship program before other applications close. So it's just worth considering and looking at other universities too. I'm just going to keep checking on that chat. Yeah, so I think there's some good practice which we can look at here, and I think keeping any interviews that you might do as informal as possible, making sure they're nothing like an asylum interview, making sure they're kind of a quick chat on the phone, a check-in, anything other than a kind of formalized interview, I would definitely recommend making sure that that's the case. Avoiding asking for any details of a reason for asylum claim. So not asking people to tell their story, but I think the example Ian put forward of asking what people will do, what their kind of future plans are, looking at something that's positive as an outcome of this program is a good way of kind of doing that. And making sure applications are available, especially at the moment, to download can be really important, because not everyone will have internet access immediately, especially during this period of time. And being flexible in English language, this is another thing which actually the current crisis has demonstrated. The universities can be a lot more flexible on English language than they have in the past. And actually, the university I study at, the postgraduate, is accepting a Duolingo level for its postgraduate applications this year, because they know IELTS testing centres are closed. So I think universities can be flexible about this, and obviously it depends a little bit on your admissions. But if you can speak to admissions and ask for some kind of way that you can test without using particularly costly testing centres like IELTS, that can be a big barrier for a lot of students. So it's certainly worth considering. And offering taster days and promoting in schools are other great ways of recruiting as well. So then in terms of supporting students, we've already seen keeping anonymity on campus. So not kind of saying this is the particular refugee scholar, but just, I think everyone wants university to be a place where people can start again, be who they want to be. And so I think making sure that anonymity is there. It might be that you need to tell certain tutors about situations, but broadly speaking, not trying to kind of highlight people unless they really are happy to be is really important from a safety perspective as well. Having a named contact and regular pastoral check-ins we've kind of heard of, signposting, and a lot of this we've kind of discussed already, so I will move along. And then finally, so adapting to context, and this is something which I think is important to talk about here, is kind of location-specific programs, which we've seen across the two examples today. Thinking about funding for programs, and so Ian highlighted the Carnegie. I think there's also a lot of good practice in terms of asking alumni for funding for this. It's something that alumni are often very happy to donate for. And also looking at how different programs operate in terms of single donors, whether they ask for, I think LSE they actually ask an application fee for their normal postgraduate applications. They charge a £25 application fee, and they then use all the funding from those fees to support scholarships at LSE for key groups. So that's another option of doing it. I think providing support in kind, we've heard from Ian, and working with student groups as well is good. So it is worth thinking about, if you are in a city with other universities, is thinking about recruitment partnerships and whether or not you can go out into different schools and between different universities actually disseminate information about different scholarships in the city, and try and cover more schools that way. That's something which we certainly would encourage people to do more and more.